When you show off, you reveal more than you conceal. I'm Alderic, and sometimes I wonder, how many masks do we wear before someone truly sees us? Or worse, before we vanish altogether? Power, that word that feels so distant, so reserved for others, might just be waiting for the right moment to seep into the way we exist. And you? Have you ever felt like you were playing a game without knowing the rules? Some books don't explain. They place a mirror in front of you, but it's warped, shadowy, uncomfortable. The 48 Laws of Power is one of those. It doesn't shout, it whispers. And in that whisper, something shifts. A quiet discomfort, a strange urge to look closely at what you usually try to avoid. Not because you want to control others, but because you're tired of being controlled without realizing it. This isn't about tricks or formulas, or to defend this book as any kind of truth. I'm not here to tell you what to think. Have you ever thought about the kind of power at play in your everyday life? Maybe because, between the lines, many recognize something they've lived, but never had the words to name. And yet, the more people try to silence him, the more he sells. His ideas have been called dangerous, brilliant, amoral, manipulative. He gathers the stories of kings, impostors, courtesans, traitors, and arranges them like a quiet puzzle. And maybe that's why he's so disarming. Robert Greene doesn't speak like a teacher. But maybe the most unsettling part is when that scent seems to come from inside you. In some moments, it's as if the pages carry the scent of something ancient, the scent of courts, betrayal, and thrones. It's more like walking through a corridor where every step reveals what you've tolerated, what you've accepted, what you've let slide. If that thought stirred something in you, drop a comment. Have you ever felt like something or someone was pulling the strings behind your life while you believed you were writing the story? In the next chapter, we'll begin this descent together. Because sometimes all we need is for someone to say, "Look at this, gently, don't turn away." I'm here to open a space for reflection. It doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, or what your intentions might be. If you live among people, you're already part of the power game. That's one of the strongest undercurrents that runs through the early pages of this book. But no one ever told you the rules. It's like walking into a room where everyone is already playing. Either you learn to read the game, or you get played by it. The book rests on one harsh truth. It's there in conversations, in silence, in glances, in timing, in compliments that aren't quite sincere, in temporary alliances. There's a hidden structure running beneath all 48 laws. Power is a social language. And what the book quietly suggests, without ever saying it outright, is this: not playing is already a move. This game isn't optional. And here's the unsettling part. Those who refuse to manipulate are often manipulated. There's no real neutrality. Those who try to stay transparent are mistaken for weak. Those who don't position themselves become stepping stones for those who do. Most of the laws aren't even about direct action. They're about perception. Control your image. Maintain distance. Know when to stay silent. Move close to power without threatening it. Never outshine the master. It's as if the book whispers constantly. The battle is happening. You just thought it was a conversation. And maybe that's why this book makes people uncomfortable. Not because it lies, but because it reveals a world we prefer not to see. A world where affection might be calculation, where kindness might hide ambition, and silence might be a weapon. You see this logic in every story Greene selects. Kings executed for trusting too much. Friends betrayed for letting their guard down. Innocents crushed simply for not reading the room. The book isn't structured like a guide. It's more like a field manual. Each law is a thread in a larger web, and that web quietly repeats the same warning over and over. Pay attention. No one will warn you when it's too late. Who hasn't felt like they showed up too late to a game that had already begun? Based on the 48 laws of power, not every move needs noise to make an impact. Sometimes what rules the room isn't spoken, it's felt. If there's a hidden force running through the pages of this book, perhaps it lives here, in the art of wanting without showing, of aiming without pointing. Conceal your intentions, Greene writes in Law 3. And with precision, the less you say, the more profound and mysterious you appear, as if power belongs not to those who act, but to those who edit what they reveal. Silence, then, isn't absence, it's design. Another quiet maneuver. Make other people come to you. Use bait if necessary. Law 8. It sounds passive, but it's anything but. Greene clarifies, when you force the other person to act, you are the one in control. With distance, you draw desire. With stillness, you pull the strings. Louis XIV understood this better than most. While handing out titles and arranging endless festivities, he never ceded power. He veiled it. He became the sun, and everyone else merely rotated around him. Appear generous, but never give away what matters. Create an air of unpredictability, says Law 17, because the more unpredictable you are, the less control others have over you. And suddenly, you start noticing it everywhere. A compliment that comes too easily, a silence that lingers longer than it should, an absence that feels like presence. Use selective honesty and generosity to disarm your victim, warns Law 12. Sometimes kindness is just strategy in disguise. But the book isn't pointing fingers. It's tracing patterns. And between its pages, something becomes clear. Power rarely announces itself. It arrives dressed in coincidence, in charm, in timing, and that's why it works. So maybe the real question isn't who's manipulating whom, but how many times have we played along without knowing the role we were cast in? Not everything fits into a single line of reasoning. Some ideas don't need to be explained, they just need space to resonate. As we move through these pages, layered, hushed, and watchful, certain images start to return, not like warnings, but like questions that linger. One of them has to do with anything that comes too easily. Despise the free lunch. In Greene's words, what is offered for free is dangerous. It usually involves either a trick or a hidden obligation. At first glance, it might sound harsh, but maybe it's just a reminder. Not everything given comes without weight. Sometimes, generosity carries a thread we don't notice at first. Not because people are malicious, but because being human means navigating expectations, often unspoken. Another recurring thread, the value of mystery. Always say less than necessary. Silence, here, isn't emptiness. It's presence, chosen. Some people fill the space by speaking. Others shape the space by holding it. In a world that constantly demands full transparency, this book suggests a quieter truth. Not everything needs to be revealed. Sometimes what you hold back protects your freedom. Then comes the idea of reputation. Greene writes, so much depends on reputation. Guard it with your life. It's not about living behind a mask. It's about recognizing that, whether we like it or not, we live in networks of perception. People interpret us through the signals we send and the ones we leave unsent. And that doesn't have to be a game. It can be a form of awareness. Later on, one of the book's most brutal laws appears with quiet force. Crush your enemy totally. It sounds ruthless. But maybe it's not about cruelty. Maybe it's about endings. Some things, unresolved, find ways to return. Sometimes the enemy isn't a person, it's a pattern that keeps coming back until it's truly closed. Between these ideas, the cost of the gift, the choice of silence, the reflection of reputation, and the clarity of endings, something softer begins to emerge. Maybe we're not just talking about power, maybe we're talking about coexistence, about boundaries, about choices we make even when we think we're simply reacting. And within that web, the book doesn't seem to want to teach, only to awaken. And if something here made you uncomfortable, even just for a moment, maybe it's not because it was too harsh. Maybe it's because somewhere deep down, it touched something you've lived but never named. Not every discomfort is a threat. Sometimes it's just the beginning of seeing more clearly. Chapter 5: The Soul of the Labyrinth. Master the art of timing. That's what Law 35 says. And maybe it's not just another law among the 48s, but the hidden heart of the entire book. Because behind every story, every strategy, every mask, there is a quiet question lingering. Can you wait? Robert Greene never says it outright, but it's as if the whole book revolves around one single axis: time. Not clock time, but the internal rhythm of situations, the tempo of gestures, of relationships, of decisions that can shift everything, but only if made at the right moment. To master the art of timing is not simply to act, it's learning how to hold, how to read a room, how to sense when a door is truly open and when it only seems to be. This is one of the book's deepest layers, because it dismantles the idea that being competent is enough, or well-meaning, or brave. It's not. Without timing, strength becomes pressure, truth becomes threat, courage becomes noise, and this is where the book begins to reveal its soul. It doesn't give you tools to win, it forces you to notice where you're standing. The question shifts from, "What should I do?" to something far more subtle: "Is now the time?" This awareness of rhythm, of presence, of pause, it shows up again in laws like the very first one: never outshine the master. What may sound like submission might actually be the foresight of someone who reads the terrain before stepping into it. This isn't about deceit, it's about clarity, about seeing what's really in motion, what's implied, what hasn't happened yet, but is already beginning to unfold. Maybe that's why so many people resent this book, because it removes the comfort of believing merit is enough and replaces it with something colder. The understanding that social life is a sensitive field, and those who fail to read the moment become props for those who do. But it's also why millions keep reading, because beneath all the discomfort, the book gives shape to something we've all felt. Most things don't fall apart because we lack strength. They fall apart because we moved too soon. Greene doesn't tell you who to be. He just shows you what happens when you don't notice the game. And that quiet discomfort you feel after reading, that might be the first step towards seeing more clearly. So I ask you, gently, what if power isn't about doing more, but about learning when not to? If anything here touched something you've lived, hold on to it. Not everything needs to be answered right away, but maybe next time you'll recognize the right moment before it passes. What if the things that transform us the most are the very ones we try not to face? Not the direct attack. It's what we quietly allow without even realizing. It waits, it learns your rhythm, and then it interrupts. So now I leave you with something that won't resolve itself easily. What if the version of you that plays fair is just a survival strategy you never questioned? No answers, just the weight of the question. And a room suddenly too quiet. The idea is powerful, but what happens when it turns against itself? Getting this far left me unsettled. The 48 laws of power guides us with surgical precision. Conceal your intentions. Maintain the upper hand. Never trust fully. But somewhere along the path, something begins to crack, as if the book itself suspects. Following every law might protect you, but it may also erase you. Love all, trust a few, do wrong to none. Shakespeare's words, from all's well that ends well. Because if no one can be fully trusted, if every act of kindness might be a trap, not because I agreed or disagreed with what I read, what are we left with? A life where even affection is a strategy. Layer upon layer, Greene builds a system that demands constant vigilance. But eventually, a question begins to whisper beneath it all. Can you hold power without becoming a prisoner to it? Some laws ask us to vanish. Some say, appear generous. Others, strike without mercy. But at what point does strategy turn into suspicion? But because, in certain moments, it felt like the book was staring back at me. When does the game stop serving you and start consuming you? To be thus is nothing but to be safely thus. That's Macbeth, devoured by ambition. To be king is nothing unless safely king. The tragedy isn't conquest, it's the inability to rest. Greene never draws a clear line. He observes, he collects. But within the precision of his guidance, something begins to ache. Part of me wanted to close it, because behind all the laws, there's an unspoken cost. You win, but at what price? And what happens when there's no one left? Who knows the version of you that isn't performing? A man may smile and be a villain. And maybe that smile was always just a mask. This isn't a flaw in the book. Another part couldn't stop listening. It's a revelation. The contradiction doesn't weaken the ideas, it exposes their depth. Because you're left wondering, am I playing to survive? Or just too afraid to stop? Maybe the book isn't here to resolve this. Maybe it's here to hold up a mirror and say, what if the part of you that calls itself strong is just the part that forgot how to be seen? And what if the silence left after the last page? It was strange to notice how often I had played the role of the innocent. Isn't the end of the game, but the start of something deeper? Sometimes what matters most doesn't announce itself, it waits, just beyond the noise. In a book filled with thunder, betrayal, masks, control, there's one sentence that barely makes a sound. It doesn't warn, it doesn't repeat, unless you're quiet enough to feel it. How many times I gave too much space. It comes early, almost like an afterthought. But once you've walked through every law, once the mirrors have turned inward and the masks start to fuse with the skin, it returns, like a thread you didn't notice pulling you the whole time. Avoid the unhappy and the unlucky. Law 10. At first glance it feels cold, even cruel, as if it belongs to a different kind of book, not one about strategy, but about indifference. So we read it and move on. There are more important laws ahead, we think. More spectacular stories. Was too transparent. More elegant betrayals. But now, after everything, the confessions, the contradictions, the unraveling, this line begins to shift. Because it's not just about who we avoid, it's about what we refuse to see. About the deep discomfort we feel when someone else's failure reminds us of our own fragility. Unhappy becomes contagious. Unlucky becomes a curse. And so, silently, we exile what we fear becoming. This is the law no one likes to quote, because it doesn't feel like power. Not out of weakness, but because I thought that was the right thing to do. It feels like rejection, like abandonment dressed in reason. But maybe that's exactly why it matters. Because beneath all the maneuvers, all the theater, this is the law that exposes our most human reflex to distance ourselves from what threatens our illusion of control. Who we listen to, who we turn away from, who we call a burden when all they needed was space. And then something even heavier emerges. Maybe this law isn't about others, not the visible strike. Now, I'm not so sure if it was strength or just a failure to read the moment. Maybe it's about the parts of ourselves we exile too, the moments when we felt unlucky. What if, in avoiding the unhappy, we learned to avoid our own pain? What if this quiet law is where the book stops being about power and starts being about survival? Abandon all hope, ye who enter here. Dante Alighieri, Inferno. The words at the gate of hell, maybe that's what moved me the most. Or the threshold we cross when we forget how to hold space for what hurts, in others and in ourselves. So now, I leave you with this. What if the most honest thing in the entire book was the line everyone tries to forget? And what if power has always been about what we choose not to look at? Some pages don't point outward, they point inward, like an old mirror, stained, maybe cracked, but still sharp enough to reflect what we try not to see. This realization that being good, honest, well meaning isn't enough, not clearly, but uncomfortably. Each law seemed to speak about others, the powerful, the ambitious, the manipulators. But maybe now the question shifts. What if it was always about us? One line comes back, like a whisper with teeth. Make others come to you. Law 8. At first glance, it feels like a tactic, a calm, strategic move. You need to know the ground you're standing on. But underneath, it's something else. A quiet devotion to ego, the fantasy that, if we just wait long enough, the world will notice us. It's the same illusion that fuels algorithms, that crafts posts screaming, "Look at me," while pretending not to care. The idea that we can be irresistible without ever risking anything. No exposure, and more importantly, when not to take the next step. No rejection. But maybe what this law really exposes is our fear of being forgotten, the dread of reaching out and being met with silence. So we dress up our insecurity as confidence, call it strategy, turn longing into posture, in relationships, in work. Power, it seems, isn't about conquering, in the way we sell ourselves as unique, when all we want is to be chosen. Make others come to you becomes the silent mantra of a world, hiding behind filters, waiting on messages that never come, performing identity, while longing to be seen without the mask. And then the book changes, not a manual of power. It's about not being captured without knowing it, but an intimate diary of a generation, trained to look strong just to avoid falling apart. A world where caring is weakness, where vulnerability is shame, where being visible demands performance, but feeling is still forbidden. So we wait, all of us. Who moves first? It's knowing when to pause, when to give in, when to go quiet, is realizing that in trying to win, we drift away from everything real. In the end, what hurts most is not the silence of others, but how much it sounds like our own. So tell me, what part of you flinched while listening? Not to explain, not to defend, and when to disappear, just long enough to return at the right time, just to notice. Sometimes the most misunderstood book is the one that sells the most. And the 48 Laws of Power might be the clearest, and most dangerous example. Because something strange happens when a book speaks about manipulation, control, and strategy, it attracts exactly those who want to use those tools without ever looking in the mirror. It's as if some readers treat the laws like a menu, a quick manual for domination, a crash course in how to appear powerful, without ever asking why that performance feels so necessary. The most common distortion, but what comes next, might be even more uncomfortable. Believing the book is a celebration of cold ambition, as if you could simply follow the formula, smile with dead eyes, hide your intentions, never show weakness, and suddenly you're untouchable. But those who read it like that didn't really read it. They consume the book like armor, thin, shiny, and hollow. They confuse intelligence with detachment and use Greene not as a guide, but as a shield against their own fear of being seen. Because the book doesn't hand out recipes, it reveals the game, not so you can win at all costs, but so you finally understand what's happening when you're not watching the board. Because now that we've heard the whispers, the essence isn't about controlling others, it's about mastering awareness, understanding gestures, reading the stage before stepping on it, and maybe, most uncomfortably, asking how much of you is still performing, even when you think you're being real. But subtlety doesn't go viral. That's why the book is so often quoted by opportunistic politicians, self help influencers, or anyone who confuses power with cruelty. Crush your enemy totally becomes an excuse for violence. Conceal your intentions becomes a mask for cowardice. Make others come to you becomes pride, masquerading as confidence. In some circles, the 48 Laws has become a fetish. The book begins to speak louder. Not a book, but a badge of hardness, a way to say that feeling is weakness, that manipulation equals intelligence, that rising above others is the only way not to be hurt. But the book never said that. It actually warns you. The game is real, and it isn't kind. And because of that, it deserves to be read slowly, with humility, with a little more silence. Because a book is like a mirror. It reveals, but it doesn't correct. It doesn't shout. And if all you see in it is a weapon, maybe you're just trying to defend yourself from something deeper. So before applying any law, ask yourself, are you reading to understand or to hide? Maybe real power belongs to the ones who can read the 48 laws without losing the parts of themselves that still feel. It's not easy, but maybe that's where the real reading begins. Some books aren't meant to be read, they're meant to read you. The 48 Laws of Power may never have been about strategies, victories, or manipulation, but it tightens. Maybe it was a mirror all along, not the kind that reflects what you already know, but the kind that bends the image just enough to show you what you've been avoiding. Because when you read this book, you're not just interpreting it, it's interpreting you. Every law that provokes, every story that disturbs, every silence that lingers, none of it only belongs to the text. It belongs to what echoed inside of you when you read it. It's as if the book is asking, softly but insistently, justice or control, protection or dominance? What are you really looking for here? And this is where the tone begins to shift. Justice or control, protection or dominance? Do you want to understand the game or win it without ever having to look in the mirror? This book doesn't just teach tactics, it exposes comfort zones. It unearths buried desires. It shows how much we want to be seen and how afraid we are of what that actually means. Take something simple. It stops being a reflection about others. The law, crush your enemy totally. Some read it and feel disgust, others, a strange thrill, and some feel relief, as if Someone finally gave permission to an old anger that never had words. Same phrase, completely different reactions. Because the book doesn't change, the reflection does. That's true for any powerful book. But with the 48 laws, it cuts deeper and starts pointing inward because it speaks the language of what we deny. It touches the part of us that wants to be good, but has already learned that goodness alone doesn't protect you. And maybe that's why so many people hate this book and why others worship it, but very few actually listen to it. If you'd like to keep thinking together, subscribe. It helps me keep this kind of conversation alive. So if you've made it this far, I'll leave you with just one question. What did you see in this book? And what did you choose not to? Maybe it made you feel exposed. If this video stirred something in you, leave a comment. Maybe it made you feel understood. Maybe both. But whatever your answer, it says more about you than it does about the author. And that's the blind spot of all power, the illusion that we're reading the world, when in truth, the world is reading us. Real power isn't in knowing, it's in enduring being seen. Thank you for staying with me until the end. You don't need to explain it all. If you've come this far, it means something inside you was stirred. Maybe it wasn't an answer. Maybe it was just the right silence at the right time. If you'd like to keep thinking together, subscribe. It helps me keep this kind of conversation alive. Quiet, but persistent. Sometimes a single line in a video can echo for days. And maybe the most important part wasn't what was said, but what was felt.